So we're in this closed loop where power supply is driven by power demand. And there seems no indication that our power demand is going to lower. And there's no indication that the power supply guys are going to be able to get below 60% fossil fuels to generate all that. So does that mean we're done? We can all go home now? We're out of school? We don't have to do any more effort? Because at some point, the titans of industry and finance are going to come up with some solution that'll help the power supply guys get out of their 60% fossil fuels? I think there's more that can be done. And I think there's more that we can do on our side because we're beneficiaries of material prosperity, but also beneficiaries of the methodology and the evidence that brought all that to us. And that methodology and evidence says that if we cooperate, focus, bring imagination, some expertise, heart, some capital, we can improve things for all of us. And our greatest enemies are cynicism, apathy, and a misunderstanding of your power and my power. We've solved problems at this level of complexity and scale many times before. I could tell you about water supply. I could tell you about sewage treatment. I could tell you about recycling. I could tell you about accessibility for people who are disabled in public buildings. I could tell you about stormwater management and how that's helping estuaries and rivers across the world. But I'm going to tell you about a system that impacts me on a daily basis and I'm much more familiar with and is much closer to my expertise. And that's the building code. So I'm part of a system. People with my credential are part of a system. And that credential requires a 5-year undergraduate degree. It's a specialized degree. It requires 3 years of internship under a registered architect in very specific subject areas. And that qualifies us to take a 4-day, 12-part exam. We have 3 years to pass all 12 parts. A third of us pass it the first time we take it, but only 2/3 of us really pass the whole thing. It's a really hard credential to get. And there's not too many industries that require that much training and that much preparation of their professionals before they go out into the world and practice and help people. So why is this? It's because I'm part of a fire and life safety system that's 128 years old. This system began not at the federal government level, not at the state level. It began at the city level. City of Chicago in 1897 passed the country's first building code. As part of that code required that design professionals such as myself be licensed to practice in that area, where I had to prove that I understood the principles of fire safety in the design of buildings. And that when I went to design a building, that all the components were there, and that when I would put my stamp on those drawings, actual stamp, sign it, date it, that I'm certifying that these drawings, this building was designed in compliance with the fire code. So where did the fire code, why did Chicago decide to do this? Because 26 years before, they'd been devastated by fire, and they weren't the only ones. Chicago, Boston, Seattle, Baltimore, San Francisco, in a 40-year period, were among the biggest names of fires going on everywhere. This was happening not just all over the country, but all over the world as the Industrial Revolution gathered all of us in cities so that we could make the Industrial Revolution happen. And what that meant was that we brought all of our candles and all of our oil lamps together and built flammable conditions. And all you needed was a grumpy cow to kick over your lantern one night and poof, tens of thousands of acres are burned. Tens of thousands of buildings are gone. Tens of thousands of people are killed. Building code seemed like a good idea at the time and started up. Couple outcomes. deaths, since 1920 in the United States, we've been recording casualties related to fires. And by 2000, 80 years later, we've reduced fire deaths by 87%. That's a wildly successful system. Another surprising outcome is, to me, the greatest untold story of the events of 9/11 is how many people escaped the Pentagon and the Twin Towers because there were fire systems in place, because the building code was in place, and both that government building, the Pentagon, and those commercial buildings, the Twin Towers, had been built in a way that in the event of a fire, people could escape those buildings and that firefighters could go in and get people out of those buildings without risk to their lives. That's the fire code. And yet it was a pretty bumpy, long road. Why? Well, I'll give you an example of the kinds of things that were in the way. The 1904 Baltimore fire, it's a 10-alarm fire. And the fire marshal in Baltimore doesn't have enough equipment. So two firehouses out of DC make the 1-hour journey up to Baltimore, and they go to hook their hoses into the fire hydrants. Side note, those fire hydrants are part of a brand new series of technology brought to you by electricity and pumps, right? When they went to put the hoses on those fire hydrants, it didn't work. Why? Because the threads were cut differently. So those 2 firehouses worth of equipment were worthless. And if you're the fire marshal in Baltimore that day, looking at this, you're going, you've got to be kidding me. You're defeated by a technical detail. One of the best tools that we have in our engineering toolbox is the standardization of technical details. And so that happened, that changed. And part of what came along with that was an economic boom in the creation of firefighting equipment. And, there was some wealth generated. There were jobs to be had. Manufacturing increased along these lines. But the much, much, much more important outcome was that jurisdictions across the country had access to firefighting equipment they could rely on that much faster. And it's true not just for the firehouses, but for all the components that are part of the fire system that I design in my buildings every day. And the 400,000 of us architects strong, we implement this in schools, hospitals, offices, museums, stadiums, so that when you walk in the unlikely event, in the increasingly unlikely event that there is a fire, you can find your way out. And firefighters can get in and put that fire out before there's not only loss of property, but loss of limb and life. Did all that change because an architect had an ethical outburst that we can do better and design better and should do better? No, that wasn't enough. Did all this change because insurance companies went bankrupt because they didn't have enough money to cover the losses? No, that wasn't enough. Did it change because fire marshal after fire marshal kept having parades for fallen firefighters? No, that wasn't enough either. Because we as a society can convulse. We hem and we haw about these things. And we go back and forth. We have to go through tragedies. We have to suffer through tragedies before finally we listen to the technical solutions that are right in front of us. So when I got the details between the power strip and the impact it was having on creating acidification in the ocean, I knew much better what my power was and what your power was. So let's have a chat about that.